Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as the world marks May 9th as Victory in Europe Day, a commemoration that has particular importance in Russia, which lost 26 million people during the Second World War. And so each year since 1945, Europeans and the former Soviet republics now have commemorated this day in a way that is particularly sacred, having gone through 6 years of war until finally the Nazi armies were vanquished and Soviet troops came into Berlin and met American, British, and French armies, and the war was over. It's particularly poignant this year because, as we all know, war has again engulfed Europe. And once again, just as Germany did in the Second World War, following Napoleon in 1812, the eastward expansion of NATO driven by U.S. expansionism, has ignited another war against Russia. And if you listen to Vladimir Putin's remarks on Red Square today, he said in a very sober way that real war is now taking place in Europe between the United States and NATO against Russia. Using Ukraine as a proxy. It's interesting to note that the same German company, Rheinmetall, which provided tanks for the German army back in the 1940s, is still producing tanks, and the Leopard tanks, as you've heard, produced by this company, are on the front lines against Russia again today. So we wanted to commemorate this by hearing from a woman in Russia who has an idea for how this situation can be solved. We'll hear from her in a moment. And then we'll also have a program on storytelling from one of our own Ubiquity University graduates, which was the schedule that we had before we really realized that the importance of this day in light of current world events. So we're going to have two programs today, one commemorating Victory in Europe Day, and our regular program on the importance of storytelling. Because it's, after all, the stories that we tell ourselves that are important. But before we dive in, let us just pause, as we always do on Humanity Rising, and let us breathe together, knowing that it is as breath-breathing human beings that we find our commonality. So let us, for just 10 breaths, let us breathe as one. Thank you, everyone. No matter what's happening out there, it's always good to practice coherence breathing. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Tatiana Ginsberg, who's a psychotherapist and teacher who's been passionate about knitting Russia with Americans. Was one of the co-founders of Russia House, which she and some colleagues established in the United States several years ago. And she, in the midst of this conflict, has been trying to figure out ways to bring peace. And so she exemplifies the kind of citizen diplomacy that we've been calling for some time as the war is unfolding in Ukraine and the dangers of nuclear weapons increases day by day. So Tatiana, I want to welcome you to commemorate V-Day in Europe and just share with us your vision for peace.
Thank you, Jim. I will open my presentation right now. Thank you for this opportunity to share.
We don't, oh, there we go. We can see you now. Yeah.
You see me and you see my slides, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to share the results of planetary thinking about war and peace. Before that, I want to share a little bit about who am I in order you understand my point better. So this is me, and I was born in 1971 in Leningrad. And today is Victory Day, and this is a really big celebration in Russia. So it's one of the main holidays here, and almost everyone is celebrating it in some way. And for me, it's also personally important because both of my parents was in Leningrad siege, and they lost their parents in the siege, and they've been taking, like, they've been 8 or 10. My mother was 8 years old, my father was 10 years old, and they've been taken from this Leningrad siege. And they are lucky by road of life. So for the whole life, they remember about that as a very important part of their life. And for me, the Victory Day is also really one of the main days. So I've been born in USSR, but in 90s, when I was 20, we had perestroika, and I was young enough, and I was looking for a new way of living, and I was actually looking for the meaning of life, and I found several groups. This is on the picture, one of the very mystical group, which was popular in Russia in those times. And finally, I found the guy whom I understand as a teacher, and I still very active in spiritual path. And now we created a group which we call School of Fifth Way. So in some way, we continue Gurdjieff type of living, Gurdjieff style of spirituality. And if you remember, he was a fourth way presenter. So we continue this idea in integrating other methods and ideas. And also, speaking about me, it's really important in my life that I created Russian house. This is a picture of Russian house. And this is California, Jenner, and it's on Russian River. And this historically Russian area, because more than 200 years before, the Russians came from Alaska and created Fort Ross. So this river called Russian River. And we created a place which was a restaurant, which was cultural center, and in the same time, it was very like transpersonal place, place for personal growth. And it was also frontier style of building, of business, of operating, because we don't have prices in the restaurant, and we don't have menu. So people could eat what they want and pay according to their conscience. It was not easy to stay with such principles, but we really succeeded for about 6 years. And a lot of people was moving by. It like was a regular tourist. It was Americans, Russians, transpersonal people, like simple people, very, very poor. And because we were interacting with people not as a client, but we were interacting with them as possible friends, as human beings. So we could create a lot of good relationships. And here is some pictures with the people, some of them from transpersonal psychology, some of them are just travelers. And we really could create an atmosphere, an environment where interaction between people could happen. And a lot of people just from a road help us with dishwashing, with cooking, with building, with everything. So moving towards the planetary thinking, I see, and this is my first thesis, that the path to peace is unity. And the friendship is a tool of creating unity. So we get some principles in operating our Russian house. For example, we never closed our door, almost never, even at night, even where we was absent and the house was nobody inside, but the door was open so everyone could come, get food, get rest, and get this atmosphere. So some principle like trust, closeness, openness, and creating something in common is actual sources for the friendship. And I see that this is a basis for the healing and for the achieving the peace in the planet. And moving concrete to the concrete situation, yes, that the United States created this war and lots of people are suffering from that. So our solution, or my idea of solution, is the conscious cooperation. American people, the people who are thinking part of United States, and the people who are care for the peace, conscious cooperation with Russian and conscious migration to the Russia. When we were in the United States, in a Russian house, we helped a lot of people to adapt in California or in the States, and we was real cultural center, which help to penetrate the cultures. So the real close communication is important for the penetrating the cultures and for human understanding. So in order to create a friendship and unity, it's important to be closer. So this is maybe fantastic, maybe utopian, but the idea that if some American people will understand it, they or you are really very welcome to Russia, and we can help you. Right now, I'm in our Eco Village. We have a place in between Moscow and St. Petersburg, and we can help you here, or we can help you anywhere to become part of Russia. And ideally, if there will be many of those people, maybe US would not bomb the country with where many Americans are living. So the next problem which humanity is facing right now is ecological crisis. And here's just pictures from our regular practice, like those 10 days of May, we are cleaning highway. So we are very close to the highway in between Moscow and St. Petersburg. And each morning we begin with the cleaning. But it's still, there are a lot of garbage. And right now, with all this war stuff, the ecological footprint became more, because, you know, all the flights from Western companies are not allowed to fly through Russia, and a lot of Russian people can't fly straight to where they were flying. So such a big footprint happening on ecology, and ecological crisis is bigger and bigger with all these weapons, which is making more and more weapon from all the sides. So the main idea of solution of ecological crisis is basically the same, the unity. And if we can understand that planet Earth is our common home, it's not only for American, it's not only for Russian or for somebody else, it's our common home. And that's the main idea of the solution. And from like ideal state point of view, so if finally in the Earth will be just one state instead of being many states which are fighting with each other and keep the borders and trying to get more resource, that the idea of getting more and more resource for some people, it's actually destruction of ecology. So my way of thinking, maybe again ideal, but this is the main solution for the ecological crisis. But really, in order to get to all these solutions, that inner transformation needs to happen with the people. So the people who really feel unity with the planet, they can choose to clean the planet and share whatever they have. And we have intellectual club in our school, and actually we practiced this club for more than 20 years, and even being in California in Russian house, each Sunday we have this club. And we are thinking on all these questions, and we were thinking about new worldview. We read the book of James Sire. It's American Christian theologist, and he found 7 questions which put the basis of whole worldview. I would not read whole 7, but just to had an idea. So the first question is, what is prime reality? What is really real? Or the second is, what is the nature of external reality? And what is exist around us? So James created the evolution of worldview, which is on another picture, like theism, deism, naturalism, nihilism, existentialism, pantheistic monism, and postmodernism. So he get an idea that the whole humanity and as whole, and some people are going through this evolution in their worldview. And when we put it on a circle chart, we understand that nihilism, it's a 0 point, and nothing is opposite to it. So that moved us to create deism, which is opposite to nihilism, and which is say yes. It's a Russian word "da," which means yes to everything. And this is worldview, which is saying yes to the whole world. And this is not just intellectual worldview, it's like a way of life when you live in a way that you try to accept whatever is coming from the world towards yourself and interact with it as if it's something important. And this is just a couple of answers of our new worldview. Dadaism or Dadzin, it's we like it even better. And Dadzin answer in a way that what is real is everything is real, and mystery is a nature of external reality. And a human being is an ambassador of the mystery. And if you will be interested in that, you can find the other answers. So one of the principle of the Dzin is also that the world is whole and kind. So we add like an ethical component, ethical idea to the world, to the whole, to the holism. So in sense of understanding the whole world is kind, this is a way of accepting whatever is happening. So deism is a path to integration, both on personal and a global level. And practice, yes, is a practice of integrating the internal and external, allowing each individual to move towards integrity. We are a community of practitioners. One of our name is Homo Ludens Institute. We accumulate experience in the development of people in the context of this worldview, and ready to share this experience. So this basically all shortly the ideas which I wanted to share with you, and this is a way to know more. Again, my name Tatiana Ginsberg. Here is my email. This is free website which exists in English, Russian House. It's Russian House, it's closed now, but the website is still exists. You can get an idea what it was. Enlightenment expert, because I did a lot of work searching for enlightenment and speaking with many people about what is enlightenment. And Shiram Daism.ru, it's a website about our eco-village and retreat center here. And I also am author of a book which called Spirits of Breath, Integration Methodology, which is available in Amazon. And I am ready and would be very interested in your question if you have one. That's all.
Thank you, Tatiana. You might close your screen share. Good, thank you. Well, thank you for that very moving story about yourself and the creation of Russia House by the Russian River. That was a very poetic thing for you to do with your colleagues. I remember being in touch with you a number of years ago when that was all being set up. And as you know, the Esalen Institute did a lot of work with citizen diplomacy starting in the 1970s and 80s and continues to the present day. So there's many of us that have been actively supporting this kind of work for many years. And if there's ever a time where we need this kind of big thinking like you have represented in the last few minutes, it's right now. And I'm just wondering whether you could say a few words about the situation in Russia right now. You're there in Russia. Most of us just get distorted news reports about what's really going on and how the Russians are feeling about things. So take a few minutes and just tell us your impression of how the Russian people that you're interacting with anyway are feeling, you know, a year and a half into this war.
No, as everyone, nobody likes war, so Russians don't like, of course, that they want war have been stopped as soon as possible, but a lot of people still think that the war is the right way for Russia. So that unfortunately there was no better way to solve the problems like that shortly. Maybe you will ask me something in particular so I could understand, could answer more about that.
Well, just, you know, as you're commemorating V Day in Europe, there's been reports that it was scaled down. And I just thought people would be interested in your impressions about the state of the public mood in Russia about the war, about Vladimir Putin's leadership. I've read that his polling is very high, and that he has very strong support among the vast majority of the Russian people for what he is doing. But these are just press reports. So you're there in Russia, so you would have a much keener sense of some of the realities.
Today is definitely Victory Day, and definitely a lot of people are celebrating it, like our neighbors in the village. And they're not villagers, they're mainly urban people, but they gone to the nearby cities and cemeteries just to honor and celebrate Victory Day. That's an example. But of course, a lot of arguing, and because of a younger generation, they already get raised in a different words, like in a different world. Like I mentioned that my parents like have a great experience of great patriotic war, but the younger generation they don't have such a close relationship with that. So some of them, we have some more younger people who don't understand what is happening, and some of them left the country, and some of them are still arguing with the war.
Mhm.
So there is a separation in society too.
Yeah, well, that's understandable given what's happening. So, well, Tatiana, I want to thank you for being with us today and extend our best regards to all your friends and colleagues there in Russia who are thinking about peace in a time of war. And it's my hope that we might be able to work together more closely over the next weeks and months to see if there's any way we can ignite the kind of citizen diplomacy now that was catalyzed back in the 1980s and 1990s by the Cold War and the dangers of nuclear war back then. So I stand ready at any time to do whatever we can to work together, because there's nothing more important in our day than bringing peace to Ukraine and peaceful relations between Russia and the United States and NATO. So thank you so much for your presentation today.
Thank you, Jim.
That was Tatiana Ginsberg, everyone, from Russia on this very important day, V-Day, in Europe, that commemorates the victory of the Allied forces over the Nazis in May of 1945. We'll now turn to our other guest for today, Greg Katz. Greg is a alumni of Ubiquity University and our Wisdom School. He's a psychotherapist, he's a spiritual director, and he's also a textile artist. And he combines all three of these aspects in not only writing a brilliant PhD dissertation for us, but in his work in the medical establishment and in psychotherapy, using the visual arts and art generally to enable people to catalyze the healing process within himself. He is a master storyteller. And so, Greg, I want to thank you for joining us today. And Greg will take some time making a presentation about the kind of work that he does, and then we'll have a dialogue after he's finished. Thanks, Greg, and welcome to Humanity Rising.
I am so excited to be here, and even more thrilled that I got to share this day with Tatiana, because that was really an incredible presentation and experience for me. So thank you for that. Looking at the chat, I was noticing, and I do this as well most of the time, I just want to acknowledge that I'm on the land of the Arapaho, the Cheyenne, and the Ute. I'm in Parker, Colorado, which is about 20 minutes south of Denver. So we have a very rich Native American community in the area. It's interesting because we're going to talk about storytelling, but not in the traditional way, not in the way of either having someone stand on a stage and tell a story or have you read a book. We're going to look at this more from the visual perspective. So one of the things that I was very fortunate that Jim was the person teaching the dissertation course. And what I remember him saying was, whatever you wind up doing your dissertation on is the soapbox you will stand on for the rest of your life. Which, as it turns out, it's true. So, so to start, I wanted to just start with a poem by Rumi called The Guest House, and that'll put a context for sort of how every day is a narrative. And Rumi says, "This being human is a guest house, every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes because each has been sent as a guide from beyond." So one of the things about when I think about sort of visual storytelling, we use words and we use phrases. So if you've ever heard someone say, "There are no words," well, that could be true. And one of the things that I'm thrilled about is there may not be words, but there may be signs, symbols, pictures. So we have so many opportunities to talk about visual pictures, and that's where we're going to start. So this is a word cloud. So if we were together or everyone had something called, there's an app called Poll Everywhere, P-O-L-L. So if we were in a room together and we all had Poll Everywhere, I could post a question and you could put in the answers and we would hit a button and we would come up with this word cloud. And what would this word cloud be? It would be a narrative. It would be a narrative for anyone and everyone who was participating in this particular event. And that's pretty incredible because the way that it works is you'll see that there are words of different sizes. Well, the biggest word in this case for this particular one is knowledge. It means that the most people in the room use this word. And then in descending order of how frequent someone used it. As of recent, I've been collecting, these are from a store. Every time I go to the store and I get a paper receipt, I'm starting to put them together because I'm putting together an art piece, and they are a story. If you look at my shopping lists, no matter what store it is, you will learn something about me that you didn't know before. My likes, you'll notice things that are left out. The same could be said if you go to my bookshelf. If you go to anyone's bookshelf and you look at the books on their bookshelf, you will be able to tell a lot about them. And they didn't have to say a word. And that I find pretty incredible. So as we go through this, this piece is a quilt. And I belong to a textile artists guild, and I was doing a presentation on narrative. And the month before, I asked folks to bring in a piece of either fabric or a motif from a piece of fabric or a magazine. It didn't really matter. And then I brought in a blank canvas and brought in paint and other materials and said, you as a group, and there were about 60 people in the audience, they all came and they created this piece together. And at the end of the day, I said, now that you've put it all together, you've created this piece, I'll now take it home and quilt it. But this is a narrative for the room today. It might change tomorrow. You might have different feelings. You may have had different experiences. But for the group today, this is our story. And it was interesting to watch not only the piece that came about, but to watch the people around the table do things like paint over someone else's piece, or slide something under someone else's piece, or have people do something together on the piece. This is Guernica. This is probably one of the most famous anti-war pieces ever created. And this was by Pablo Picasso, talking about, interestingly enough, the bombing of Guernica in 1937. And it was very controversial. It was very controversial. But Picasso really felt that he needed to make a statement, and not, and you know, this is one of those things where someone, as an artist like Picasso, who has gravitas, it got, I can only imagine what it would today in a technological world where he put it on social media, but it's a pretty incredible experience. Faith Ringgold is about I believe she's about 91 years old. She is a very well-known textile artist in the United States, in the New York area, and really did a lot about the Black experience in the Harlem community. You know, coming up in a time where not only women were not valued for their voice, but particularly people in the Black community in America were not. So, I mean, you're talking about someone, you know, in the 1950s who started doing this work and really were not accepted. And she got her voice heard. So this piece is from 1980. It's called Echoes of Harlem. And it starts to talk about who is in the community. And that's one of the things that Faith Ringgold is really known for, is she not only comments on community, but she comments on the country. And there's a book I have here by Faith Ringgold. If you just look up her name, the amount of work that you'll see that she's done is really incredible. And she's still creating and speaking today, which is really terrific. The next piece from her is called Street Story. It's also a quilt. And it's telling the story of Harlem. For those that are not from the New York area or haven't been to Harlem around the globe, I invite you to Harlem. Harlem is built with a lot, like a lot of European cities, with a lot of very vertical buildings that are, you know, we call them either row houses or brownstones. And in Harlem, this was her experience of how people lived. And she wanted to let people know, like, Harlem is here. You need to see what the community is like. So she did this. The other part is, so I do a lot of work in the medical humanities, which is sort of a mixture of creativity and medicine. And our goal really was to create practices and experiences for people. Number one, for practitioners to develop a creative practice so that they have stress relief, so that their suicide rate goes down, their connection to patients increases, and everyone has a better experience, and we keep medical providers in the community, which is really important. So one of the activities that we've done is we ask, and I really invite all of you to do this, is to go to an art gallery, go to a museum, doesn't really matter, and spend 30 minutes with a painting and see what that experience is like. A quiet meditation, maybe it's a particular part, but we know that the arts impact how we see the world. And sometimes you have to be taught how to see. And medical humanities in my area came to the medical school, CU Denver at Anschutz, when there was a study out of Yale, and I believe it was in 1992, and they took dermatology residents and they gave them a slide deck. They gave them a slide deck of pathology reports, pathology slides, and they asked them basically to diagnose what they saw. So they finished that, and then they put them through a 6-week program at the museum, teaching them about art and how to see. At the end of the 6 weeks, they gave them a slide deck. They gave them the slide deck and had them go through the diagnostic process again. And what they found was, following the 6-week how to see, they had a 40% increase in accuracy, which is huge. Imagine you're going for a biopsy and they take the sample and they send it to the lab. I would hope that the person knew how to see so that they had a pretty big diagnosis, a correct diagnosis. But other people go beyond, and this is really one of the things I want to talk about, is it's not just about medicine. This piece is called Middle Passage. This is a collage piece talking about this woman's stories from her family, passed down for generations about the Middle Passage. It's dramatic. You don't necessarily even need a title. You just need to look and feel and see what it does to you. Kara Walker is she does these cutouts, and we're used to them, this kind of art, where it's just sort of a silhouette. You see a lot in museums from the early days. Sometimes you'll see it engraved on a cameo. She took it to another level because she really wanted to talk about things like lynching and didn't want to paint it. She wanted it to be black and white. She wanted it to be bold. And that's how her work came about. She's an extraordinary artist with many accolades. Vijay Kumar is an Indian-born artist with an international reputation. He teaches printmaking. So the first piece we're going to see is a conversation between artists. So this is his experience, right? We're talking about someone's experience, which is amazing to be able to translate it from, this is how I see. If I take a step back and look, this is my experience. So now we get into, forget the words, but what do I hear? What do I see? What do I feel? And I superimpose that, and then I create a piece like this. The other thing that Kumar is very well known for is he talks a lot about conflict and mourning. So this is one of two pieces I'm going to show you where they're talking about the teardown of a mosque. It's so visceral. If we took out the headline of Hindus tear down mosques setting off a crisis in India and just looked at this piece without the title, it could be many places in the world. Given the state of the world today, this could be many places in the world. So there's a universality that starts to come out when we look at visual storytelling that makes it, number one, you don't need a translation, right? We're not looking for, how do we translate this into 137 languages? We want you to look and say, do you relate to? What does this serve as a catalyst for? Once it serves as a catalyst, what's our next step? This is another piece that he did based on the photo superimposed with printmaking in order to tell the story of the grief and the mourning that happened following this particular incident. It's interesting. There was someone I just saw in the chat a little while ago that that responded to Tatiana about Yes Magazine. So Yes Magazine had a mental health issue a couple of years ago that showed sketches of college mental health, the college mental health crisis. And we know that we're talking a lot about mental health. The suicide rate in the country is terrible. In the United States, I should say, in the country I live in, 22 veterans a day take their own life. There was just a study that just came out last week that in 2021, one third of teenage girls seriously contemplated suicide. The cyberbullying that's going on. So this was artwork, which I found really incredible. And again, if you think of yourself as that person sitting on the seesaw and think about what's their experience, where's their hope? I was just at a conference for Spiritual Directors International in Madison, Wisconsin, which obviously is, for those that don't know Madison, it has a very large university with probably 30 or 40,000 students. They're getting ready to move out for the year and graduations are happening. But this is what their world looks like. There's a chaos. There is a chaos. So before I move on, I do want to talk about, there are what we call, so there's an illness narrative, and there's a sociologist named Arthur Frank who really came out with a three, I don't want to say three stage, but three aspects of narrative. And as we're going through this work, I think we can really superimpose that. And it's not about an illness narrative. It could be about any narrative where there's a challenge. So he talks about the restitution story first. And in the restitution story in the medical world, it would be, how do doctors get me back to where I was? And it puts a lot of responsibility on the medical community to provide a return to normal. But if we think of war, if we think of poverty, if we think of drought, who do we want to make things normal again? In cases of war, we want the government. In cases of drought, we would hope that the world comes together to look at the climate crisis and things like that, and how do we get back there? Then there's a chaos story, and the chaos story is chaos. There was a book written by a gentleman. The book is called The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, and it's a movie as well. And the individual had a massive stroke, which basically left him locked in his body, being able to think, but couldn't move anything but his eyes. And he dictated the book by blinking every letter of the book. So imagine having to do, a Z and having to blink your eyes 26 times in order to get to a Z. It's like the old days on the flip phones where you had to push the button a number of times to get the letter you wanted. And finally, there's the quest narrative. So that's like Odysseus, in the Odyssey, going on this quest. And it's not only about the journey, but it's about the lessons that they learn along the way. So as we look at a piece like this, what do we learn, right? The hope is that we do a little bit better than where we started. Another piece from the mental health crisis. This piece is titled Mania. So I've been a psychotherapist for about 35 years. And if you've never sat in a room with someone who's manic, It can be pretty frightening. Now, mania comes in many forms. It could be just someone whose brain, they have a biochemical, but it also can be induced by substances. This same person, so this is, again, so sometimes this is one of the things that I love is when I need to tell you something and there are no words, right? So if I can't explain to you what I'm feeling, maybe I can show you. This is that idea of don't judge me till you walk a mile in my shoes. And if you look at this, this could be pretty horrifying of an experience when you say, gee, if I were doing this, what would that be like? Her next piece is about anxiety. And this is a methodology for those that are art therapists or expressive arts therapists or people that just want to meditate looking for insight into their world. Take the words out. Just take the words out. When I wanted to really look at sort of a bigger picture of the health humanities and ethics, our med school offered a graduate program. And one of the classes was a course on health advocacy and film. And I went to the professor and I said, I really love this course, but I saw that there's a film that has to be done at the end. I really don't want to get into filmmaking. And she says, oh, no, this is for the pharmacy students. The graduate students just need to write a paper. But about midway through the course, when I was listening to the pharmacy students think about their projects, I said to myself that I really wanted to engage in some sort of creative practice in order to tell stories of advocacy, social justice, and a little bit later down the line, we'll look. I have two pieces that I put in to talk about some of these social justice issues. But I want to talk about in the United States, we're having often very large conversations about incarceration, the number of people we have incarcerated in the United States. And this is a piece that Kevin Smith did that I saw when I was visiting Pittsburgh, talking about what it's like to be incarcerated, and particularly what it's like to be incarcerated as a person of color in the United States, which is the majority of those who are incarcerated in the United States. On the health side, we have medical students who just happen to be artists. This is a woman that was doing one of her externships in Southeast Asia. And this was an accident that had happened. And this was her witnessing, because she was a med student, she wasn't engaged in the practice, but she was witnessing the surgery. And when she left, for someone, if this is the first time they're seeing this, to deal with the experience and the overwhelm, and then the anxiety of what would I be doing if I had to do this, she did this painting. The other part about about health or your experience, again, take this to any, whether it be war, famine, poverty, what's your experience and how do you tell the world about it? This piece by Michael Nader, Michael was, when he did this, was a third-year medical student, but he's also a diabetic. And what you see is he created basically a self-portrait using test strips, glucose test strips that he uses multiple times a day to see what his glucose levels are, to see what amount of insulin that he needs. Hopefully this person might be familiar to some of you, Frida Kahlo. Much of Frida Kahlo's work was done autobiographical. If you don't know her story, she was in a horrific accident as a late teen, in a bus accident. and spent years in her bed. And her parents were taking care of her. And one of the things she came to think about was, how was she going to tell this story if she couldn't move? And what they wound up doing was they wound up putting a mirror above her bed so that she could see herself. And those became the images. So this is because she had a spinal injury. This is one of the ways that she tells what her experience was like as someone who was broken, literally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. The other thing is, if you've ever visited somebody at home, in a hospice, in a hospital room, we always do it as the person visiting. So we're looking at them. We don't always know what the person is experiencing other than overwhelm and trying to get well, if that's in the cards. But Robert Pope was a Canadian artist who did a number of pieces from his point of view. And this piece, Visitors, really gives you the sense of, number one, being the center of attention. Everyone either waiting around for you to die or get well. And as you can see, not everyone is present with the patient. Robert Pope died, a young man, from lymphoma. But he did these pieces because it was too hard to put into words what it was like to be a patient. The interesting part is, if you were to do this with any other situation, what's your experience of being in war, as a for instance, and as an example, there's a woman named Dickie Chappelle, and Dickie Chappelle was was a war photographer, and she was the first female war photographer killed in the Vietnam War. But this particular book, called Dickie Chappelle Under Fire, you will see her reporting war from her experience, because it's all we can do. The only thing we have is our experience. This piece, Why Not Sneeze, by Hannah Wilke, she wanted people to see what it was like to be sick. Hannah Wilke had breast cancer. And, excuse me, and it was a way, if you look at it, to say, that's a lot of drugs. What's their experience? The other person is Martha Hall, and Martha Hall is a bookmaker. And she was pretty innovative, because bookmaking is a very old art form, and there are many ways to do book binding and book creation. So when she was telling her story, she was trying to figure out how to relate to people what it's like to be a patient. Like, how does it impact your day? And one of the ways that she did that was, she took, back in the day, okay, so this was 20 some odd years ago, she took all of her appointment cards, back in the day when we gave people an appointment card so they knew what their next appointment was, and she turned them into a book. And what the book showed was, number one, how many appointments she had, but it also told what type of appointments she had, and how many maybe were in a single day, depending on how she broke up the book. But it was another way for her to tell her story without telling her story, right? To talk about exhaustion, to talk about overwhelm without words. This piece I really wanted to talk about because it was a great example from the interviews that I did for my dissertation. So I was interviewing people, and all but two of the interviews took place in the artist's either home or studio, and most of them had a studio in their home. And I was interviewing this woman who had thyroid disease. And one of the questions for the for the interview was, do you notice a change in your art based on what type of medication you're taking? And she kind of looked at me and she said, could you repeat that? I said, sure. I said, so if the doctor changes your medication because they look at your test results and either something's too high or too low, or they're trying to mediate side effects, after you get this new medication, do you notice a change? I said, in your being? And do you think it impacts your art? And it was like lightning struck. And she goes, oh my goodness. She says, come with me, come with me. And she starts running through the house. And then we run up the stairs and we go to her studio and she pulls out 2 paintings. So the painting on the left was when she had an experience of hyperthyroidism, which is an overactive thyroid. And if you think of the piece before about mania, they were bright colors, it was a chaos to it. This was her example. She lives here, and we have a lot of aspen trees. This is what hyperthyroidism was to her in her art. And she said, you know, last year, before I changed my medication, I wasn't feeling well. I was really sluggish. I was very tired. I didn't feel well. I was on the depressed side. And if you look at the colors on the right, they're muddy, they're darker, there's not as much definition. And this was like I had handed her the keys to the kingdom, because now she could almost put her paintings in some sort of time in chronological order. And it told her story of her illness. It told her story of her experience having thyroid disease. It's almost like she could take her work to the doctor and say, I know you're looking at the numbers, but look at my art. And it will tell you probably a clearer story of how I'm feeling internally. The next 2 pieces are actually mine. This piece is called Flee. I'm in the process, this is number 2 in a series that I'm working on about those who have to leave their home for whatever reason. War, poverty, drought, religious conflict. It doesn't matter, but this was, when I was listening to a news story, this was one of my experiences of their experiences. And the only way that I could sort of tell people about my experience was to do this piece. The other piece was really about inequality in medical care. And I don't know, in the United States, there's a website that if you put in your zip code, it will tell you what your life expectancy is. It's weird or sad that there are cities that are maybe 3, 5, 10 miles apart, and there could be a 5, 10, 15-year life expectancy difference based on things like where are their grocery stores, their food deserts, what's healthcare like? Is it just community clinics, or are there a lot of doctors and hospitals? So I did this piece. It's called We're All Equal Here. It represents the morgue, and that the only time that we're all equal is on the slab with a toe tag. And I did this piece, and it was interesting because I showed it to my cohort in the Health Humanities program. And I had a doctor, he was a retired OBGYN, and he looked at this and he didn't understand it. And I asked him, what don't you understand about this? And he says, well, I don't understand the toe tags. I said, do you understand they're dead? And that's when it hit him like, oh, now I get it, right? So I purposefully used all different skin tones because it didn't matter. At some point, we may all wind up in the morgue. This piece is about self-knowing. This is a gentleman who was diagnosed with dementia. And we're going to go through a real quick chronological, because I know we're running out of time. We're going to go through his story chronologically. And he basically did a painting every year to tell the world what his experience is and what his identity is. So this is the first one. And then this. And then this, as he goes further into his dementia. And that's his final drawing before he dies. So if you're game, if you want to, for yourself, I started a collage practice about 4 years ago. So I do a collage every morning. And I title them and I write about them. But if you wanted to, you could take this piece and you could title it. So if you just look at that and write down a title, I'm going to do 4. And then I'll go back real quick and tell you what they are. I can't find what I did. Oh, there they are. So that's the first. That's the second. When you see it, what do you think, feel, ponder? What's your question? That's the third. And that's the fourth. So just real quick, I'm just going to go back and give you my narrative for these pieces. So this piece says, how can we ever capture the wisdom that lies within each of us? I have a dear friend who entered hospice. I have stories and lessons, but I've never cataloged them. And I've been going through my memories and extracting all the lessons that she has taught me. This collage is called Inquiry. It says, we often think of children continually asking the question why is annoying. The adult answer of because I said so doesn't cut it. Can we learn to stay in the question? Are we capable of using questions as stepping stones? And what question would you like to ask today? And then mind map your possibilities. This piece is called Blackout. Those facing depression often feel chased emotionally. Like our power grid, overload may lead to a power outage in our lives and souls that may result in death by suicide. Let's be there for one another so the blackout of those we love doesn't happen. And finally, this piece is called Tribute, One Person's Impact. This morning, I learned that my dissertation advisor, Lucia Capacchione, transitioned. She was a mentor, a cheerleader, an inspiration in the field of art and healing. Thank you for being my teacher. And there we go. You can follow me on Instagram, like I said. So at this point, I've been doing this collage stuff for about a little over 4 years. Today's collage, I believe, is number 995. So you can, if you follow me on Instagram, I post them there. You can go back the 4 years. You can take picture, use them if you want to play this game with some of your friends, with students, with colleagues, as to what do they see when they see something. I think it's a great exercise. And my email, if you have questions, thoughts, concerns, let me know. And thank you.
Wow, Greg. Those are some of the most dramatic series of images I've seen in a significantly long time. I mean, starting with Picasso all the way up to the present time, the power of art in expressing the human predicament and grandeur is just quite extraordinary. Quite extraordinary. And you haven't noticed, but the chat is full of enthusiasm and just admiration for what you do as an artist, but also the way that you pulled together these powerful artistic expressions. So in the first instance, I want to just acknowledge your mastery. Thank you for what you've done. It brought me back actually to Tatiana's single photograph right when she started of the siege of Leningrad. And you can see in one single work of art, the totality of a siege that lasted 1,000 days.
Yeah.
And so the power of art to cut through the chaff and reveal the essence is so immense. And so I just want to, in the first instance, just thank you for all that you've done. I'm sure you're a very effective spiritual director in psychotherapy, because your mastery of the artistic form is very accomplished. So thank you. I thought we would just start the dialogue and the balance of the time by talking more about your experience and how art, in hospital conditions and in conditions where people are seriously ill, what's been your experience of how art really can enable people to heal? You gave a few instances, but you've been at it for decades now, and I wonder if there's any conclusions that you have made. I know that more and more hospitals are integrating the expressive arts into their therapeutic regimes because it's such an extraordinarily well-documented way of healing. But just share any perspectives you have on that.
Yeah, it's actually very interesting. So first of all, for people that are interested, there's an organization called the National Organization for Arts and Health, and it's both artists of all mediums, dance, clowns, the whole bit, and healthcare facilities coming together to really talk about the impact. The differentiation I do want to make also is that there's a difference between curing and healing. And we're all looking for a cure. We may not all get a cure, but we can all be healed. And the healing takes place in there being a reconciliation and a peace that comes from, which is what I find a lot with artwork. The other thing is we've seen incredible results on pain management, using the arts as a means of pain management.
Wow.
And that to me is one of the great aspects. And and it's not just sort of visual art. It could be song, it could be dance, it could be writing. I mean, anything that keeps us present. And I think that's what I love most about the arts, is that when you're in it, you're in it. It's sort of like the Buddhists saying, when you chop carrots, chop carrots. If you're painting, paint. When I'm doing my collage, and it's a very intuitive process for me, it's evolved over time. I used to go in with an idea like I want to do a mental health piece today. Now I sort of start going through images and I wait for the one that's going to hit, and then I build it around that. And that's been a much better practice. But it keeps me in my body.
Yeah. Well, that's such an important distinction between cure and healing. And because I think Western medicine is built around cure, take a pill
Yes.
for this, do a surgery for that, in a mechanistic universe in which chemical processes and technical interventions are sufficient to just eliminate symptoms. But art really, I would imagine, really focuses on health and the well-being of the whole person, as a consequence of which people may or may not experience cure.
And also within the medical field, we differentiate, well, those of us in the health humanities differentiate between treatment and care. And what you'll often find is doctors treat. They come in, they give a diagnosis, they come up with a plan, and the other healthcare providers all around are there with you. They walk the journey with you. They're around 24 hours a day as opposed to rounds twice a day kind of thing. So that split between treatment and care, and I think that's where arts and healthcare really comes in, that they become part of the care team. They leave the treatment to the treatment people, but they're part of the care team.
Yeah. And I wonder too, Greg, have you or anybody noted differences in different artistic techniques on their capacity to enhance well-being in particular types of illnesses? Because if you think of alternative medicine, acupuncture works in some ways that is distinct from homeopathy, for example, or chiropractic. So I'm just wondering whether in the artistic domain, whether you've noted any particular differentiations, or does sort of one size fit all, and as long as someone is doing something artistic, there's a general enhancement of psycho-emotional well-being and physical well-being.
I think that's actually very interesting, and I don't know what kind of research is out there, but as I personally think about it, I think of something like singing and dance, if the person is able. Singing is easier, obviously, for some people than dance, but depending on the illness. But I even think of myself that if I'm singing, that there is a sense of being transported. So there was, it's kind of funny. There was a show maybe 20 some odd years ago called Ally McBeal. And she was like this young law student. And anyway, during the show, everybody would sort of break out in song, which was really kind of weird. But at one point, Tracy Ullman, the comedian, comes in and plays her therapist. And Tracy Ullman says to her, "You need a theme song." And she looked at her and she said, "What do you mean?" She says, "Well, at the beginning of a television show, they have this theme song. And then for generations, every time you hear that song, like it triggers something."
Sure.
Right. And all of a sudden, part of the episode is she now goes on a search for her theme song. And I really encourage people to do this, because I think that we can make a connection between something like a song and our physical being, or a song and our wellness. Or you think of I think of Helen Reddy back in the day when she came out with that song, "I Am Woman," and it became an anthem for the women's rights movement as a means of unity, and everybody learned the song and you could sing it and chant it, and it became a worldwide sensation. But I think the same could be true for any. So I personally have a couple, I have a couple of them. And you know what? I go to them all the time. So if you ever see me in a park and you see me singing, the odds are I'm singing one of those two songs, kind of thing. So.
Fantastic, fantastic. By the way, Kim Kerrigan was just asking the question about what was your personal journey to get to the fiber arts?
So that's kind of funny. So I had a friend in college who was a seamstress, and she was sitting there one day and she was sewing these 9-patch pillows in her room. And she says, "Do you want to make a pillow?" And I said, "Sure, what the heck?" So I made a 9-patch pillow, hand sewing, no machines. And that was it. I made one or two, put it down. And then I got out of college and I was like, I think I like this quilting thing. So I would buy a pattern or that kind of thing. And one day I turned on PBS and they had a 10-part series on the history of quilting. And I went and signed up for my first quilting class the next day. And that was back in 1992. And then, so I started making very traditional, not in terms of color, but, you know, I'd buy the book and I'd follow the pattern, and that was great. And life is good. And then I found someone who was teaching a color theory class for quilters, because we're not like painters. We don't make our color. We buy our color, right? And unless you're painting your own fabric kind of thing, which I do now. But I decided, because I was already good with color, that I was really going to use it for design. And I threw away all the books and I said, well, I'm now just going to sort of do this intuitive process. And I got to the class, and by the second month, the woman who was teaching, she said, you know, there's a group of people who do what you do, which is not follow books and just do this kind of stuff as an art medium. And that's how I found my people. And I've been there since like 2004.
Amazing. Amazing.
I like tactile, which is why I like collage, because, you know, I'm a knitter. I like things. I like to feel things.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. That's clear. That's clear. You know, Stan wanted to bring in Gurdjieff. Tatiana had talked about learning from Gurdjieff. Do you have any familiarity with Gurdjieff or the Enneagram or any of the aspects of his mystical tradition?
So I'm an Enneagram 4. And it's funny because there's a lot of talk about the Enneagram now. In fact, it was interesting. We were talking about it at the conference, and one of the women that I know said, so what do you think is all this stuff about the Enneagram? I said, it's been around like forever. It's not like somebody just opened the box yesterday and said, oh, pick a number, pick any number. And I remember I took it. I went through the Enneagram process when I was an intern, so maybe 30 years ago at this point. So I'm an Enneagram 4, and my wing is a 1. I think it's great. I think everybody should take it. Between that, between that and the Myers-Briggs, life is good.
Fantastic. Well, Greg, I want to really thank you for your time and your enthusiasm for the process. And, you know, I can still remember when you wrote your dissertation, I was very curious as to how it was going to turn out for a PhD dissertation on one of the textile arts. And you did an absolutely brilliant job. And so I want to just note that, and that Greg is one of the exemplars par excellence of the kind of students we have at Ubiquity, because we really try to honor the passion of each and every student, so that whatever it is that you are as passionate about as Greg was in his domain of art, we design a whole program to support that pathway. And so that's very important for our ethos as a university. And Greg is one of our stellar alumni. So I just want to acknowledge you, Greg, at that level, and thank you for gracing us today on Humanity Rising with something that is both gentle but extraordinarily profound. You know, and I just want to leave you with any final word that you want to share with us about art or about your work or anything that you think is important for us to consider in our crazy world.
I think everyone should have a creative practice. I don't care what it is. You go buy a coloring book and crayons kind of thing. I just think everyone should have some sort of a creative practice, and find mentors, find people that will encourage you. And I mean, I was very fortunate to have Lucia as a dissertation advisor, who was a phenomenal artist, but then also my external examiner, who was the professor of the first course I took at Wisdom University, now Ubiquity University, was Angie Arian. And the course was on the 9 muses. And I got immersed in all of the muses, and that was really a beautiful experience. So find people that will allow you to expand and experiment, and just go for it.
Yeah. Yeah, creativity in a time of chaos is both salvific and calming to the soul.
Yes.
Whatever that is for each and every one of us. And you know, they say that they've done the brain waves and so forth, that an artist at work creating his or her art has the same brain frequencies as mystics in deep meditation. So what you're saying is not just academic, it's actually profoundly true. So thank you, my friend. Good to see you again.
You too.
And that will bring our session to a close, everyone. You're all welcome to the after session chat. Greg will be joining us, and hopefully Tatiana, and we can have a discussion about the matters that they have been raising. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Greg. Bye for now.